Well, what death doulas, end of life doulas, death midwives, so many different names now. It's really, in the birth doula world, like that came about because it's about people that care about these transitions of coming from beyond into this world and into this world back into the beyond. And like how in our culture there's so much fear and discomfort. And so an end of life doula really brings this calm. There's a normalcy to it because we all are going to die, and like how we do that. And so we do non-medical care. So emotional, spiritual, and practical care for somebody that is moving into death and their families. And so one of the first things of study I came into is how to do a home funeral, where you keep your loved one at home and you take time to sit with them. One of the most important teachings that I've been given is that death is not an emergency.
So today's episode is on the subject of death and dying and how it connects with life. Sometimes there is fear around death, sometimes death is a taboo, and on rare occasions, people look forward to dying. I myself have an interesting relationship with death because at one point I had a near-death experience. And for me, death is a place of healing and rejuvenation. So it's my honor today to have with me Michelle Vesser, who's a death doula and a deep spiritual practitioner. And if you don't know, a death doula is someone who supports the dying person through the last journey of their life. And not just them, but the people around them. So in this episode, we look at Michelle's own journey as to how she ended up in this role of service, the difference in dying in the East and the West, and how come death is so invisible here in the West, whereas in the East, it's pretty common to see a dying person. We look at the commodification of the dying process and also new laws that allow a terminally ill patient to decide how they end their life and to do it with dignity. And one common thread throughout this conversation is, can we really embrace death to be joyful? So this is a deep episode, and I hope that you'll enjoy it. And lastly, Michelle is doing a death doula training in November. And if you're interested, please have a look in the show notes below. And if you like this conversation, please make sure to like it and subscribe to the channel, because honestly, this is the only way that this channel is supported, and I really appreciate it. So Michelle, welcome. We've been wanting to have this conversation, or I've been wanting to have this conversation with you for some time. So I'm really grateful that you're here today.
Yeah.
And we are, today, the subject of our conversation is going to be death, right?
Death and how it connects with life.
Yes, all of that, yes. So maybe, I mean, there are many ways we could begin, but right off the back, we could start with the easy topic. What is death to you?
What is death to me? That's such a great question. I think it kind of starts before that, because I think in this work, like I never imagined myself being doing this work of end of life care. I had a lot of trauma. So, it used to be like what death was for me most of my life, and how I've transformed that into a place of incredible sacredness has really changed.
Yeah, and maybe I prompt you because we were going to enter into the space of death, but partly I'm having this conversation with you because you are in the role of a death doula.
That's right.
And so maybe we could briefly, for the audience, if you could share what this role is.
Well, what death doulas, end of life doulas, death midwives, so many different names now. It's really, in the birth doula world, like that came about because it's about people that care about these transitions of coming from beyond into this world and into this world back into the beyond. And like how in our culture there's so much fear and discomfort. And so an end of life doula really brings this calm. There's a normalcy to it because we all are going to die, and like how we do that. And so we do non-medical care. So emotional, spiritual, and practical care for somebody that is moving into death and their family. So it's not just tending the person that is in the death process, but it's really tending the whole family and caregiving system, and really making it as easeful as possible, and really giving, there's so much information and disinformation about options for you, options of care, end of life options, and also how you want to have your disposition, where you want to lay. Or now there's terramation, you could be composted, there's aquamation, there's water cremation, and there's so many different things. So it's really giving people information and care, and really helping them through the whole journey. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Wonderful. What's coming to me, of course, as I started this conversation with what is sort of death to you, and maybe we're going to enter into it more. Maybe if you've already started to do that. What you're describing of this process of with the family and what surrounds death before death happens, I'm thinking of also birth. That it's a passageway, and often a not. It's there's a lot of work involved, both for, of course, the parents and the mother in particular who's giving birth, but also the child who you go through labor, and the labor can be intense, and there are a lot of things that can go wrong. So it's there's a lot involved there, and we have some sort of cultural process around that, but it seems like at least here in the West, not so much around the dying process, or you don't get to hear so much about that.
Yeah, I think one thing that you brought up, birth, like one thing we don't think about is the mystery and the intelligence of us inside the womb, and knowing how to turn over if we do turn over, and how to navigate, because we have to navigate into the birth canal and make these turns and ways to go. So there's an intelligence of us knowing how to do this. Like, birth has been happening for how long, and so is death. And I think one of the things is actually we know how to die. Like, jumping ahead, I was with my father at the time of his death, and for the last 5 days, I would just watch. I'd come out in the middle of the night and meditate with him, and just like, how do we do this? Like, how does the spirit leave this body, this compound body of earth and water and fire and air and space? Like, how does this spirit leave? And I'm like just watching and going, oh, this is illness, old age, and death. Like, we do know how to do this. And I think that is a thing that's so missing. Like, it is common. People are dying all the time, and our culture now really keeps us away. And one of the things that has been so important in my journey of transforming fear and discomfort into this place of sacredness is that all traditional cultures knew how to take care of their loved ones through the dying process, and when death happens, and even after, how to take care of the spirit after it leaves. And as so much in our modern culture, we've given it away to the medical world, dentists, funeral homes. Like, we all used to know how to prepare for conception and prepare for death. And so for me, when I first was like, I need to step into this, I need to really change my inner traumas and dialogues. And I really felt like, oh, I'm taking myself to mystery school. We all used to know how to do this and be there and be present and like love people through. Even though there's, grief is an interesting thing, because grief and love are so close. And what I've really come to find in my work as an end-of-life doula is this is my education of love. This is love school for me, because I have never experienced love like I have at the time of death. and where grief, like people grieve because they love so much. And like, what is that to really love somebody through this life, really honoring this life, how short or as long as it is? Like one of the things that I think that's helped me so much about what death is and what this life is, like I've listened now to a lot of near-death experiences, and I know you have had a near-death experience or several near-death experiences. And when you get to the other side, they talk about this being Earth School. And we're given really hard scripts because on the other side, we can't really have a felt sense what love and grief and pain and happiness is. And we come down here and we feel it. And it's a lot. Life is a lot. No, everybody has complex lessons to go through in this life. And so for me, it's like, okay, what did you learn? Put it in your medicine pouch. Like, take this in. Like, we all are learning so much being here. And it's not always easy. And then times it's beautiful beyond measure. But we are here learning things. And then we leave. I think what's helped me so much when I was leaning into this, not just the practical, legal things of dying in the United States and beyond, is really the spiritual part, because that's when things changed. I had the great blessing at the time I was studying with Lama Tsultrim Aleoni in Colorado at Mandala, and her husband died. I was with them. I was in a retreat 3 weeks before he passed. And he passed one night in the middle, like around midnight, boom, gone. Like he had premonitions of going. And it was like I had this opportunity to really be in practice with death. And then after Lama Tsultrim went through her year of grief and was in year retreat, it was the first thing she taught were some of these death practices. And I was blessed to go to those retreats. And it really allowed me to understand more, like the Tibetan world, just like so many worlds, have been studying death for 14,000 years.
Yeah.
And to like be in those realms of tradition, and just to say, I've been a farmer for 37 years. And so I've brought life and taken life and cultivated soil and nourished so many people. And there is something about the elemental coming into form and leaving form that made me understand, like, oh, this is what's happening. Like the elements all dissolute at the time of death, and then our consciousness leaves. And it was like, oh, this is a language and an understanding for me that I can really relate to.
Yeah.
And it takes the mystery sort of out of, like, we talk about impermanence.
Yeah.
And things are coming into form and leaving form all the time. And so it just made it more connective to my understanding of life and death.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, so maybe we unpack, because there's a lot there. And so as you were saying about as you were sharing with sitting with someone who's passing, I think you were bringing the point that we already know how to die. And the same with perhaps with birth as well, although there's a lot of support that's needed. There are similarities between these two processes. And what's coming to me is that we have so much discussions and events that happen in our life, and yet there is simplicity in the process of birth and of death. We're not having debates about many things. There is something innate, something instinctive seems to take over.
Yeah, and especially if you could remove your own fear and discomfort, that is a cultural bias. It wasn't always here. We talked about this a little bit about children. Like, children in death, they don't have fear. When they find a dead rabbit or a snake, they go to it. They're fascinated. They'll put altars around it. They're like, what's happening? Like, our fear and discomfort comes from our acculturation. And so I think so much is being able to shift that. In my work as an end of life doula really has changed people's concept about death. And especially one of the things that first drew me to this work, lots of times when somebody dies, they quickly call, they're transported to a funeral home. We're not involved. It's just like, oh, over there, and other people take care of them. And so one of the first things of study I came into is how to do a home funeral, where you keep your loved one at home and you take time to sit with them. One of the most important teachings that I've been given is that death is not an emergency. Like, how do you really stay with and be with this incredible energy of release that happens at the time of death? The room changes in ways I can't even explain at times. It's just like sometimes I'm like, oh, they died. Like I just know that they passed. And then to take the time to tenderly wash this body that held the spirit, and for the last time, is one of the most intimate, beautiful things. And the person that is being washed, their whole body relaxes, their color changes. Lots of times a smile comes on their face. Like to have a family wash their mother, or you to wash your partner for the last time, there's something so beautiful. And to change them into clothes that they're comfortable in, and then adorn them with essential oils that has been an age-old practice, and then put flowers around them and beautiful fabric, and then they get to have time to unwind their consciousness out of their body, out of the chakras, out of it takes time to do that, and it gives the person time to really come to acceptance that their loved one has died, and to say what they need to say.
Yeah, but isn't it also that while we are alive, do we have acceptance of the process of death?
That it's so fascinating for me, because I've seen this a lot recently. Like, how is it that we come to acceptance that we are going to die? That, so much as I need to fight this disease and I'm not ready and it's too early. Even with my dad at 95, he died at 95. And it was like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm like, he lived to 95. That's incredible. Like, it's always too soon for us to die here. And so, yeah, it's a fascinating thing to come to that place of acceptance, and know, like, okay. And I've known people that have gotten an illness, a diagnosis, and they're just like, that's okay. I'm going to live my life and just be in that joy, finish things, go to places, and just accept that I am going, and be as present as possible. So, like, it's like, how do you bring your practice to it? How do you have gratitude for everything you've done in your life? And it's a big question. How do you come to acceptance that you are going to die? And if you can come to that peace within yourself and that knowing of your life, then your leaving can be easier, because you're not as constricted about the fear and not knowing. And I have to say, one of the most potent moments for me was going to my first home funeral. I had heard about them, but I was in one in the Philippines, which we could go into how I even changed my world around death and dying, or dying and death. But this moment is a colleague of mine passed, and I went to see them. It was the first home funeral, and I walked up these stairs. I didn't know what I was going to see, and he was so peaceful. But the thing about him, he had this huge smile on his face, and his eyes were open, wide open in awe and wonder. And I was like, oh my goodness, like, That's what death can be. Like, that's what I want. Like, wow, where am I going? And what is this next adventure? And wow. And it was like that can be. And there are many people that leave with that consciousness of like, okay, I lived this life. It's come to its completion. I've come to my final illness. And wow, what's next? And how do you have your consciousness be curious? You know, the Buddhists, and they believe like the consciousness at your time of death really dictates where you're going next, you know, and how what is that consciousness you want to take it to eternity? What is the consciousness you want to bring at that moment of death? How do you come to this place of peace
Yes.
with your leaving?
Yeah, actually, that's bringing, Michelle, that's bringing something interesting in me as you say that. I've been noticing as a spiritual practitioner, as a soul living here on planet Earth, that that attitude is ever present throughout life as well. With every circumstance, every situation, it goes in a way. It seems like it goes both ways. My attitude, my openness, curiosity, also determines the experiences I will approach, or even the ones that are occurring. How do I relate to them?
Yeah.
And it's fascinating that you are saying that, because I'm assuming that you've seen death a lot more than I have, you know. And maybe I'll just say, as you were talking, the last person that I interacted with in this sort of space of dying was my grandfather. So I'm wondering that has been almost 2 decades, if not more, which probably says something about the kind of culture we live in. You know, when I was used to be in India, or in the India-Pakistan region, every week, every couple of weeks, if not often, I would see somebody's funeral being carried through the streets.
Yeah, we don't see it anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, it's away.
20 years is a long time
Yeah.
to see a dead, interact with a
Yeah,
dead person. Dead
yeah.
other animals I've seen, of course.
Yeah. I mean, our culture keeps it, we take it away, it moves away. There's just dis-ease around death,
Yeah.
you know? And so that, yeah, it's like, how do we shift that? And, you know, my own journey in shifting it, I don't know if you want to get into that, but
Maybe
this
let's
moment,
let's bookmark it
yeah.
for later, because I think this is a. Do you think that this is sort of commoditization, perhaps, of the dying process of?
Absolutely. I mean, the lobby, the funeral home lobby, the casket world, you know, just now funeral homes by law have to put prices up on their websites. That was not the case. So, and people, I think the most important thing people could do is do pre-planning, is to put their advance directives together. I mean, I kind of laugh. I really think it should be a requirement to graduate high school to actually put your advance directives together and to really state your wishes, what you want. There's many different kinds of advance directives, you know, and looking at life support, you know, that's important. What happens in the medical world if you die and what your wishes are. If you want to be resuscitated, if you don't, what you're willing to do. And yet many of them will also ask how you want to be cared for, what you want to have happen at your time of death, what's important to you, how you want to be, your dissolutions to be. You know, it's like that you get to have authorship on your death. And, you know, so much families get in conflicts about them and like, oh, but, you know, so-and-so wanted to be cremated, but we believe you should be buried. And if your wishes are really stated, it makes it so much easier. And you get to really say what is so for you. So I think that is so important. And yes, the commodization of death and is huge. You know, in this world, like a general funeral where you go to the funeral home and they take care of the body. You have a plot, and usually there's a concrete vault put around the where you're being buried, and that's about keeping the land stable. It's about at least $10,000. It's kind of like that's a mid, more or less, but you're talking $10,000. You can, like in cremation, but also in burial, you could get a cardboard casket for $60 and you could decorate them. Lots of people bring them home and do art therapy and create just these beautiful, personalized caskets. And people make their own caskets, and then, different ways that your disposition, where you want to lay at the end, if you are going to be cremated. If you want, now there is terramation where you could be composted. It is legal now in the United States, or it is legal now in some states. It's legal in California. It won't be available till 2027. But so that's something new. It's like all the elements, right? Do you want fire? Do you want water? Do you want earth? Like, what do you feel most comfortable in? What feels right for you? And so, how do you educate people that these are all choices, and the price of those choices really vary? And then there's green funerals now where you could be laid just in a shroud or in a casket, just in the ground, or now there's forest places, and there's also these wonderful, almost egg-shape containers that you kind of get like going back into a fetal position, and they plant a tree in. And so there's so many options depending on what feels right for you, and that you get to really choose that and really make a decision. So like if you go to a funeral home, and they do everything but you're being cremated, it's about $1,400 compared to $10,000. And each one varies. And with home funerals, like, you don't have to use a funeral home. You could, you need to have paperwork done. So there's just so many things. But yes, I think because we've taken our agency out of our death and we don't want to talk about it, even if you bring up doing an advance directive, even if you want to say, Mom and Dad, let's talk about what you want. Oh, no, 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 no. Like, then you're going to bring, these superstitions, like, then you're going to bring it on. And, it's like, oh, this is so common. Like, how do we get to really know your wishes? And it's, of course, I don't want you to leave, but I want to really honor what you want.
Yeah, there is a lot a depth in here, because I've experienced both of those things that you've said, trying to bring up this conversation in the family, which it doesn't seem like people were ready. And perhaps if we were given the choice, we'll never be ready. And also, this is quite interesting. I mean, you've shared with us a little bit about the industry around that. I didn't even think about that, but I do find it peculiar, just in my own case, that how is it that I have not, death seems to happen a lot, and that I have not interacted with death in that way for a long time. But I do for myself, I find it very inspiring to come across someone like you, or friends who are in close quarters with this process. And you the way you're describing is that there's a lot of change that's happening in this area.
Yeah, there's a lot of change.
So maybe we talk on this theme of death itself. So we have used this word as a label, right? And we have, as you were describing, that there is an innate intelligence and instinct almost of course, being born and then dying. And what I'm thinking about is the life force, the life that inhabits this body and then leaves this body, has its own intelligence. In between these two time points of birth and death, a lot of conditioning happens. And often we get lost in the narratives of our lives and whatever is taking place, whether it's politics or whatever have you, human stuff, I guess. there's an immediacy of dropping all of that, right?
You know, there's this amazing exercise in one of my doula classes where you're given 5 different colors of paper, and each color has 4 different pieces, and you write down 4 things that are important to you, 4 people that are important to you, 4 things in nature, 4 actions, and then 4 things that you want to do before you go. And then there's a whole script of taking somebody through this journey when you find you have a lump. And then you have to throw away 2 of those papers. And, you know, we have to give away everything. And so what is that, you know, big dash between coming into the world with nothing and leaving the world with nothing, and all our attachments, all our comforts? You know, it's difficult, you know, and when you come into the world, you're just like a little baby and you're so dependent on your care team, right? But leaving, you have everything, and then you have to go through the process of letting it go, letting your walking go, you know, driving, you know. It's such a big thing for people to stop driving, but then you can't get out of bed, or going to the bathroom is difficult. And each time it's a complicated part of acceptance. Like, again, how do you bring that to your practice? How do you let go? How is this? And, you know, in this life, we all have had traumas. Things have happened. And yet what I've learned is that there is post-traumatic stress. There are things that happen that remain, that are in our somatic bodies, that are difficult. And yet there's post-traumatic growth. There's ways that those traumas happen that inform your character. So like you're looking at the big dash between being born and dying. Like we're here, like we come in as these pure babies, like, you know, these precious beings that have so much light and glow. And then there's layers of conditioning that a lot happens between 0 and 10, of like, how do you deal with life and being taken care of or not taken care of. And so then there's all these walls that come up, all these traumas. And I believe that this life is us taking those walls down. Like, one of the most important quests I've had in my life because of my own trauma is, how do you keep your spirit alive under the worst of circumstances and human conditions? And what I've really found is our heart and our heart essence is never dulled. It might be blocked for all kinds of protective reasons. At one time in my life, I worked in prison for 5 years. There was a garden program there. And I realized there where, you know, those people have committed atrocities. And yet, if you are given them humanity and care and tools, their hearts are incredibly pure and alive. All of us are. And our work in this world is to really find the heart essence of our being. And I've been really meditating. There's a bodhicitta prayer that I was given when I first started meditating. Is
From the Buddhist tradition.
From the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, of knowing the heart essence of your being and that of all beings, to be primordially awake and manifesting as ceaseless compassion. And I had to go, like, I've said those words for so many years, and I'm like, but do I really know what the heart essence of my being really feels like? And it's been incredible to really take time and really meditate. And what I find is, if I put energy on my heart essence and really build that and let that just radiate out of me, then life, I magnetize things to me. And it's really how my end of life work happens. Like, because people find me, I'm like, how did they find me? How did you find me? How did we come together? You know, yes, we were at this wonderful retreat with Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche, but we got magnetized to each other. And so what is that of each of our heart essence being magnetized to one another, and for us to bring our gifts really forward in the world, you know, getting past all the traumas that we've had to really show up, and to really, in a lot of the end of life practices, whether in Buddhist practice, Tibetan practice, or just in dying, is to do life review. Like what, and not like, I've been doing life review with people recently, and it's not just like, oh, this thing happened, this negative thing happened. It's like, okay, what were the lessons you learned from 0 to 5, and what are you grateful for? How do you really look at this life? In, why wait till you've passed? We have an opportunity to look at, like, what am I learning here? Like, okay, this thing's happening, either this wonderful thing's happening or a difficult thing. Like, what am I really learning, and what am I grateful for? And I just recently was holding space from some trauma, and I was like, wow, I'm being able to show up, and I'm being able to really be present and keep my heart open regardless of what is being said or coming towards me. Like, I'm just going to stay focused on that light, that truth of that person. And I think I also am a spiritual counselor, and people are like, how do you do that all the time? How are you with people in all the difficulties of their life? And I'm like, oh, what I'm doing is I'm seeing the truth of who they are, this light, this heart essence of who they are. And I'm helping them peel back all those layers so they get to remember and live into who they really are.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is also maybe a connecting thread, as maybe for the audience and for myself as well, to visit this word that you've been using a lot, and which is death, as to what it might be. Not so much to define it, but just to kind of probe it, because oftentimes it's used as a placeholder, and there's a mystery to it.
Well, maybe I'll say death is an adventure. That's what I would say about death. Like, death is a grand adventure. Like, we kind of forget how to do it, but we're all going to go there. And how it unfolds for us, we never know. We don't know what our last illness is. We don't know if it's going to come as an accident and how that is going to be. Or like in your case, that you did die and you came back. Like, we don't know. And so it is this incredible adventure. And one of the gifts in my life, I at one point had to have a surgery, and it was not something I was really wanting to do, and I tried to do everything I possibly could to shift this around for 4 years, and finally I did, and I was given this gift, like, how do you shift fear into fascination? It's like, how fascinating that I'm going to die. Like, how do I do that? Who do I want around me? How do I, when there is pain, how do I bring it to practice? What do I want to do? Like, I think that has been the greatest gift for me in everything. How do I shift fear? And fear being this future expectation, anxiety response, into something fascinating and curious. And it keeps you open and more relaxed to this adventure. So I think death is this incredible grand adventure into whatever's next, whatever your beliefs are, whatever happens, and so how do we move fear into fascination and curiosity?
Yeah, I love these perspectives, and I feel like there are always a multitude of perspectives as well. But this one that you're bringing forth I think is really beautiful. Death as an adventure. Yeah. One of the things that I am sort of feeling in myself is that there is, through my own suffering and pain in life, that no matter what happens, my essence is always, in a way, is always curious.
Yeah.
And at this phase of my life, I'm starting to feel that there is a surrender to that, that I will not fight it. There is a deeper trust that I will always remain an optimist. Of course, there are moments where I might feel that the body is tired or there is an illness, but there is this intuition that's kicking in that's sort of a phase. On the other side of it, my enthusiasm, my curiosity shines.
I think it allows you to be present,
Mm-hmm.
like that place of surrender, curiosity, acceptance. It allows you to be present. If we're attached and we're, have, trauma about what's next, you can't be present. But if you could let go and prefer something to be really different, then you could be present to this moment. I mean, one of, going back to our minds, I think one of the things that has helped me in Tibetan practice is mind training. Like, we have wild, wild minds. And it's about shifting. And one of the things that I've done in my life is to know that at any moment, there is always joy and abundance here. And it's a choice. And so for me, that became in the form of hummingbirds. And so at first I started hearing them and know, oh, I could choose joy and abundance right now. And then I started, having images of them, or I could hear them. And I think mind training, recently I was doing this work and it's like, oh, this is bad, da da da. And then I realized, like, oh, I'm trying to prove my goodness all the time. And I'm like, I'm bad, I'm good, I'm bad. I'm like, oh, this is the dualistic mind. And I just started speeding it up. I'm bad, I'm good, I'm bad, I'm good, I'm bad, I'm bad. I'm like, pop, I'm just me. I'm just here in this moment. And, this planet is incredible. Just being in this room with this light, with you, like there is total joy and abundance always. And that, one of the things in my life, that has been one of the most difficult things that I've done, but one of the most freeing things I've done, is have to go inside and really tend my inner landscape. And I think that part of it is I've realized that people that are hurt, that hurt people, whether we intentionally do it or we don't intentionally do it. And for us to be able to go inside and tend, in most of our culture, Western culture, negates the emotional process. And I think with death, if you're negating the emotional process and you haven't cultivated tools within yourself, in your life, to really tend and do it somatically and not see it as this negative thing. When I was young, going to therapy meant you're weak and how terrible. You'd go to a shrink, instead of like, we all used to have villages that supported and tended and cared. And like, I just know, like, the emotional process of doing your own inner development, like, I really see that this inner sanctuary, that nobody could be here with me but me. As much as I want somebody to understand and love me, and nobody could be here. And I think going into death, you leave alone, and to really cultivate this inner refuge, this inner sanctuary, is so important. And with that is finding how to really track in and navigate and tend to the things that have happened in your life that are going to be able to free you, so you could be more present, that you could get in touch with your heart essence, the gifts that you have. So many of us suffer from being alone and lack of self-worth. Like, I just recently, I'm like, I'm not wearing the cape of like lack of self-worth anymore. I've worn that cape for a long time in my own earth school journey. And I'm like, I'm not willing to wear that cape anymore. And who am I if I'm not wearing it?
Yeah.
And who do I really get to be in the world if I show up for myself? It's funny, during COVID, one of my biggest contemplations are like, wow, we kind of live in a very toxic masculine related culture, not being gender wise. We are all just here. And what would we all be like if we stopped adapting and appeasing and trying to fit in, and you were really you and I was really me? It would be an incredible place. Instead, we're always trying to adapt and fit in, and make sure we're safe. And so this inner tending is just, I feel like it's essential. And the people that I've known that have really gone in and have practices, different kinds of practice, meditation practice, yes, earth practices, yes, emotional practices, yes, to really build up and tend. And in death, Like what if this inner sanctuary of yours is so rich and lush and so full of love and acceptance and so full of like honoring all the lessons you went through, it's going to be so much easier to leave
Yeah.
than wanting somebody to help you make it okay from the outside.
I think that wanting to make it okay from outside is often a further delay, a postponement to actually meet death. So I want to circle back and give you my definition of death.
Aha! What is your definition of
Yeah,
death?
well, maybe definition is not the right word, but not rehearsed, but it's just something that came to me. So you said adventure, and to me, it's sustenance, it's life.
Say more about that.
Yeah. So for me, yeah, thank you. For me, in this process of life, I feel like there is a sense of, in my felt body, there is a sense of tiredness. And from my previous encounter, you had said a near-death experience, if you want to use that word. And I think you said that I had had multiple, and I was like, oh, you know, I'm sure there are ones I've forgotten about. But actually, I do yearn for this encounter.
Yeah.
So, and the reason is that from my experience, all of my burdens were lifted in this space.
That's right.
And a very powerful, although it's beyond any sense of comparison, so to speak, but from this human reference, it lacks nothing, this space. And so part of me yearns to return to that. And I find that the human journey is challenging.
Yeah.
You can have illnesses, you can be in a war zone, whatever have you, die of hunger or be wounded. And that is just such a fulfilling place, but not just fulfilling in terms of rejuvenation, but also clarity.
Yeah.
It's another thing that I yearn for in my life is clarity. And it's just very clear there. It's so clear.
Lucky you to have touched it. Because I think it gives such a different perspective of what is possible when you leave. And, lots of people that do have near-death experiences don't want to come back. And the thing about near-death experiences that I think have really been interesting, it feels like science is caught up with what traditional cultures have always known about what happens at death. That like there's this tunnel you go through, and then there's a light, and then you meet these guides, in the Tibetan world, there's Dharmakaya is that vast space, and if you could recognize it, then you could liberate. And all the colors and sounds and winds, all the senses that come in with those lights, then if you recognize Sambhogakaya, then you get to liberate. And then with life review and that's Nirmanakaya in this body,
So just to kind of, just for the audience, I think what you're describing is sort of a geography or map that certain cultures and civilizations have.
Yeah.
And if someone only has a reference of Western civilization, it's difficult because the Western civilization doesn't really have a map, right? Other than we were talking about commodification, and it's more of a hidden, it's a map that hides the territory. So you can't really use the map to get anywhere.
I love that I think that's true. I think that and that's what I have learned. There is a map. And maybe we remember that map, or in the process, you're like, oh, like when you left, there was all this clarity and light and ease. And it's like, wow, and how to recognize that actually is available to you at every moment. But you're in this form, this condensed form that goes through all kinds of complicated pieces.
Yeah, I love what you just said. You said condensed. And that is sort of a distillation or a mind construct that I have used, because as a human you have to have some kind of a context through which we live our life, and that's another thing I want to connect with. But that's what it feels like. There is an expansion
Yeah.
And then this human form is sort of a contraction. But also, interestingly, a contraction of freedom, not like a punishment,
Yeah.
but it's a choice. And I think that's another thing maybe we can touch upon, that our human lives, that's one thing I experienced, is like an empowered choice of that we are here by our own choice. And then even our difficulties have a different context when you're like, oh, there is a deeper current, a deeper mission or vision.
Yeah, and I think they really inform our lives, like looking at this idea of post-traumatic growth, that each one of those challenges actually inform your life. They have definitely informed my life. I can't, like I said, I can't imagine that I ever would have become an end-of-life doula with the death trauma I had early on. And yet, that early trauma informed me. Part of what I do, honestly, as end-of-life doula, is I give people tools that I didn't have when I went through certain difficult death situations. And that's my greatest joy, that they don't have to suffer like I did, that I could give them tools and agency and understanding and support when illness comes and dying and death and afterwards in grief. Yeah, so I think all this has really come from my trauma, that I get to keep people from suffering as much as I can and turn something that could be really traumatic into something sacred and beautiful. And that, like, oh, like that young part of me that so suffered around different pieces in my life, it's like this is the remedy. And that I get to offer that to people is so incredible. And I think that, my joy in doing this work comes from my pain and to keep people from that pain. But we all go through, what we're supposed to go through. So
Some of us do want to go through
so
that
some of us,
intensity. Like,
some people love those hard sports and want to feel that, like you feel alive in all of that.
yeah. It's fascinating because I feel like sometimes, even when a lot of support is available, I feel like that one has to respect, because there are humans who even want to reject that.
That's right.
It's like, I really want this to be hard for me, and I don't want this. I don't know. Maybe there is something to that.
I think, or we don't know how to ask for help. It feels like weakness. Like it's a cultural contract that we all need each other. But if I can't be self-made and do it myself and go, or I have shame. I have shame that I'm ill. And there had one client that, stopped talking to all her friends because I was a nurse and I'm dying. And they had shame that they were dying. And so a lot of it comes from shame, believing that you're weak if you're ill. That's besides like looking at the definition of death, like illness is seen as such a negative thing. And yet many people, I was just with an old friend that was talking to me about cancer, that she's learned more and is happier because sometimes you have to let go of everything, all your ideas, all your constructs. And so sometimes your illness is incredible medicine, internal medicine, for you to have to look at yourself and look at what's important. There's a whole difference too of like, what if there's a quick death? Some people go, I just want to die in my sleep, or, I don't want to suffer. Or like you get a diagnosis. And a lot of times if you get a diagnosis, you get to complete your life. You get to say your goodbyes. You get to finish things. And so there's medicine in that. And if it's a quick death, okay, you don't have to have painful suffering. And yet your family usually suffers more because they didn't have that completion with you. And it happens so tragically and quick. And so, how we die is so interesting, and who's present and who's not present. And it's all perfect.
Yeah.
It's all how we were supposed to go.
Right. Yeah. Again, that paradox that you're highlighting here. But it's also interesting that different cultures, and maybe we'll unpack this a little bit more, different cultures, especially cultures that are older, or the way that that culture is has archived in a way the practices, the rituals, the deeper understanding of what they have learned about birth and death. So as you were sharing that people can oftentimes die in a quick death or a slow death, even the rituals are catered to what is the kind of death that you've had. I know in India that there are certain kinds of rituals where somebody older dies versus somebody who takes their own life, for example, or dies, a young person dies in a car crash. Then what kind of rituals to do? And you have borrowed some of these as you have tried to incorporate some of these in your practice here.
Yeah, I mean, in my journey, like my opening to death is different than how I was acculturated in my youth. Was really, I was a Peace Corps volunteer in the Philippines, and there, from the very beginning, I found myself in the hospital with salmonella poisoning. And this friend came and we went to her house, a Filipina, and she showed me her family album. And there were pictures of her dead brother. And I was like, wow, wow, you take pictures and they're in your family. I was like, wow, death is really different here. And, there were people I got close to, and this one friend died, and they were ready to go on a procession into town. And they're like, stop, Michelle's here. She has a camera. And they opened up the casket and I took pictures of them. And like, that's mind boggling for us in the United States here. And then a friend of mine took her life in the Philippines, and that was just so different. I was told, I went there, and like the men were outside, they were drinking, they were storytelling, they cut down the tree, they made the casket, and the women were all inside cooking or coming and keening, just being in vigil with the body. Like that was the first time I was, in a home funeral in the Philippines. And it was so incredibly different of what that is. And so when I learned that you could do a home funeral, that you could actually keep the body at home in the United States, that it was legal, I mean, it's what we all used to do here, that blew my mind. That you could, keep the body at home or even bring the body from the hospital or the coroners. Like, it is our right to have our loved ones at home with us. I never knew that. Like, that was incredible to know, and that you could wash them and that you could adorn them. Like, and then you could actually drive them yourself to the crematorium. Like, that blew my mind. I never knew that. And most people don't know that it is our legal right to do that in every state in this country.
Yeah.
And so like that, being in the Philippines in this traditional culture, and and then there 6 months later we had this big party, and different cultures do different things, and I, for me it's like, yes, I bring pieces in and I make offerings. Like, this is possible. Like, I know these Tibetan practices, especially the Shitro practice, which is a 49-day practice. After somebody dies, it's an offering. Like, but people, it's really honoring what everybody wants for themselves, what's going to be nurturing for them. Like, I don't ever overlay what has opened me to death, but what would feel nurturing, and what's your tradition that would really feel good, or how do we blend that? Some people do 4-day fire rituals now when somebody passes, and so it's really open for our own creativity of how we want to bring somebody through that threshold, and how do we want to celebrate them, and how they want it to be celebrated afterwards.
Yeah. I think this is such an important theme, and maybe it connects to our whole conversation. One is, of course, this cultural aspect that I would like to talk more about. In different cultures, I have more of by birth, a Muslim background. And as you said, the 49-day, there's a similar 45-day period of recitation, of scripture, and grief, and other things. Although, unfortunately, it's also been commoditized there, and I don't think people, like many things. They have a lot of medicine systems, for example, in India, like Ayurveda, which are having a renaissance. But although my immediate ancestors still use some of those herbs and plants, the knowledge of why that's being done is now taking a resurgence, but for a while it was lost, maybe because of the colonial invasions, or there could be other reasons. So yeah, on one hand there is the culture, and the other thing is the context of our life with death, birth, and what's beyond, where we come from and where do we go. And I think that's very important to kind of go into it a little bit, because I think that's what sort of indirectly we've been talking about, is that without that context, if my context is just I'm born here and I will die, and in between I got to make the most, which could be, accrue power and money and fame, and completely disconnect myself from where am I coming from and where am I heading towards. At least that's an amnesia that I have lived for a significant part of my life. And it has been sort of motivated and supported by the cultures I was in, particularly when I was back home in the Indian continent. I wanted to come to Europe and to United States and Canada. And over here, there is a complete hiding of what is the beyond that you come from and you would head to. And any kind of weakness or illness is, you either have to fight it or hide it. So what we've been talking about is that there are cultures and traditions that honor, not just honor, but they have elaborate maps of the journey of the soul, so to speak. And so maybe we can go into that, because I find that connecting with that is very empowering, actually.
Well, and you'll find too, a lot of times as people come closer to death, those, early influences of spirituality come back into play. My dad was really different as he got old, and how religion started playing a part for him, where it hadn't been at different, really strong when he was young, and, it changed over time. But as we get closer to death, I think that's part of the remembering, right? Of our innate remembering, like, oh, we know how to do this. I do have a map. And how do I go to that map? And how do I call in my guides? How do I bring my ancestors? I mean, most people, this is a fascinating, lovely topic of the signs and symbols that happen as you're getting close, the conversations people start having with their brothers or their mothers, and like, oh, I got to get the ticket to the train. And like, they're trying to figure out the map back. And I think that there are ways where our traditions come into play of who are your guides, who's helping you, who are you going to meet. And yeah, it becomes very, very rich. And there's lots of people that's like, Mom, so-and-so isn't here. And it's like, no, let them work this through. They're working it through. They're doing completions. There's so much spiritual understanding that they're trying to work out in their life that we can't really understand, because it's from a different inner context, and it goes back to those traditions really coming forward for you.
Yeah, I think maybe perhaps what you were alluding to is that that sometimes in the dying process, people can sense the presence of
Absolutely.
ancestors or
People from the other side.
Yeah. So it's also that our perception changes.
Or perception. And that, a lot of people, I remember this dear friend, her husband was dying, and she's like, and he's still here. And I'm like, oh, this is what you could do. Go in there and tell him, I love you. I'm going to be okay when you leave, and it's okay to go. And she's like, oh, but he can't hear. The nurse just told me he can't hear. In many, many spiritual traditions, and many people's experience, that hearing's the last thing to go. and that you hear what people think, you hear conversations in the other room, like your perceptions completely change. And like, how do you really honor that? And what happened in that condition thing is right after she went in and told him, she left to take a caregiver out to her car, and he died. And he's like, oh, you're going to be okay. Sometimes they just want to know you're going to be okay. And they
Yeah.
do they hear a lot of what the conversations, of the care, of, there's a lot of with near-death experiences and remembering, like you could, when they come back, it's like, oh, I heard that conversation, this was going on. And like, I think we don't really understand the sense perceptions that we have towards the end of life, and hearing is one of those profound sense perceptions that happen at the end of life.
Yeah, and I think that whether we believe it or not, the our sense perceptions go beyond just a normal sensory perception that we might have. And as you're talking about near-death experience, which have become a very heavily studied phenomena, because perhaps in the West, we're trying to re-invite a connection, a context of the full journey of the soul rather than a fraction of it. And all of these have events that are recorded, fascinating events by doctors and nurses of, people reporting stuff that's outside the room of in the room in which they are in, or even sometimes outside the building, they can sense things that are taking place outside, or when they might be in a sort of a coma, and later being able to report the details of a surgery or what they heard the doctors or nurses say.
Yeah, there's a wonderful book called Dying to Be Me by Anita Brashani. There's a TED Talk in a book that it really is like, wow.
Yeah, Anita Murjani, is that?
Yeah.
What is similar to is often with, I don't know too much about this, but I know that people are able to recount their experiences of being in the birth canal or in the womb, especially in the spiritual practices or psychedelic experiences that people have. This memory is there, it's just not accessible. So apparently something is perceiving and recording
there is
all the
consciousness.
Yes. Consciousness doesn't seem to go offline.
No, we don't always have access to it, which is part of our own survival skills too, to be able to compartmentalize a little bit.
So I guess just to highlight that, I find that this context of the journey of our soul actually brings a course correction of how we are to live our life and what are the things that we might pursue. If that context is absent, then we have a lot of examples on our planet of arrogance and ignorance and war and destruction. And I have this feeling that if this context was there, it brings a natural sort of humility to at least not be, violence and destruction perhaps wouldn't be there. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I have a lot of, they kind of went in a bunch of different directions. I'll say one thing that Tenzin Mongo Rinpoche said to me when I was contemplating this at one point. He's like, oh, we're not ready to wake up. Like, there's still going to be war and greed. We as a species are not ready to wake up. And this is part of our journey in Earth School here. So that actually helped me, because I had this illusion as a young girl. We're kind of taught that, like, things happen, but we learn from them, and we change courses. We don't make our mistakes. And so that's an interesting piece. Like, can we really wake up from that? And I feel like right now it feels like an important time to bring this up, because you brought up war, you brought up death, and really my initial death trauma, my father was in World War II. He was a medic in the U.S. Army, and he was part of this amazing division called the 42nd Rainbow Division. And they came in very late in the war, in December of 44, but they were the first actually to cross the border into Germany. They were in the Battle of the Bulge, and then were going into German villages, but they liberated Dachau concentration camp. And so my father was there the day after liberation, and I grew up looking at those pictures of bodies in boxcars that were at Dachau at 4 on. Like I would go and sit on my dad's bedside, and he had, his medals, and he had a swastika that he wasn't supposed to take, and these pictures. And that had, a huge impact to like see that kind of human cruelty and death so young. It was like what it did is it locked in this belief, if people really knew who I was, that this is what was going to happen to me. And because my family came from a Jewish background, and yeah, it's been poignant, like that was very early on. And now I could look back and all the inner work I've done to see like, wow, that kind of set the course of my life to be of service and to be of care, and really looking at not othering people, and how do we bring more kindness. And what I've really learned is that when hurt people, because things leak out. Like I know little ways that that are in there, and I say things or I do things that I'm unconscious of because of my pain that I haven't tended or have now gone in to try to tend. And so, yeah, it's a big question. Like, how do we be a kinder species? And yet, if you look out in the natural world, everything is eating everything. Even when you die, you are giving your body to all the microbes that are in here. We are feeding it. Like, it is a gift. Like, how do you see, like, if your body goes directly in the ground, which it used to be doing, or in sky burials, like this body isn't your consciousness, isn't your spirit. It is earth, water, fire, and air, and space that just is being shifted, and you're giving it as a gift. As a gardener, I bring life all the time, planting seeds and creating environment for so many different species, and I'm taking life. I'm pulling carrots. I'm pulling things out all the time, and but everything is eating everything. If one thing leaves the system falls apart. And so our bodies too, going back to the earth, or going back to all the quadrillions of microbiome in our bodies that this get to feast off of us. And there's life and death happening in our bodies all the time, like the layers of our cells and skin, everything is sloughing off and then coming back into form. And so how do we, I mean, that's an interesting thing. How do we see this body as a gift to the earth when our spirit leaves that? So yeah, I mean, to have that kind of trauma, and, in this wildest thing, I've never would have ever imagined doing this. And I've had to do a lot of inner work, but come this fall in October, I'm actually going back to Dachau. I was asked to teach an end-of-life course in Spain, which came out of nowhere. I've never been to Europe before, spent any time there. And I'm like, wow, what is that to come back whole? What is that to like really honor my life journey of healing, and really knowing my heart essence, letting the cape of a lack of self-worth go, and really show up. And and I'm going, yes, for myself, for my dad, for my ancestors, but I'm really going for present day war. I'm going for what's happening in Gaza and Israel, what's happening in Russia, Ukraine, with Sudan. There's so many. Like, how do we honor the emotional process of tending and caring for ourselves? And how do we bring kindness back? And like, how do we do that? How do we stop death coming from violence and greed and ignorance? And for me, part of it is tending. Like, what would have happened, leaving those camps, if there was really, now more and more people are caught in a web of love and care. But it keeps happening. How do we stop the pain? How do we stop the money that's beyond the military industrial complex? And, you know, going like, how do I be in deep practice? Like, I see myself doing prostrations at the gate. I see myself being in really deep practice for all those people that did lose their life and all the people that got injured for what happened there, you know, that in their perpetration. And that our heart essence, all of their heart essences are the same. We get manipulated by cultural context
Yeah.
of good and bad, right and wrong, just othering, this dualistic place of.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was amazing. He's like, we all have the same blood. We've been like sleeping with each other and, you know, mixing blood forever. You know, we all are the same. What is this? Like, he was really very strong about diversity and caring for all people. And that was a gift from, you know, the atrocities that he saw and were held in. And the sweet thing is, he talked about this one place that if he ever went to Europe that he would want to go to. And so I'm going back to that place. It's in Austria called Zellem Sea, and it's just this beautiful lake in the Alps. And it's where he started his healing, where kindness started coming back. And like, how do I, you know, go to where my death trauma started and then teach an end of life course, really holding the emotional, spiritual, and practical tools we really need to step into death, but with that stepping into life. Like, how do we care for the pain in the world? How do we step in and see its normalcy, but do it with love and kindness, and come and continue to, you know, peel back the layers of my own trauma and my own othering and my own hatreds to really seeing everybody's heart essence. And so my life has been really quite unexpected and beautiful in all the difficulties that I've lived and worked through in my inner self. And that I can show up for death in a loving way.
Yeah. Yeah, as you were sharing about the wars and your own connection with the Holocaust and what's happening in Palestine and Israel right now. I think we earlier talked about I had a little bit of going into looking at some of the news, because for a while I haven't been watching any news, and I think it was a few weeks or a couple of months of interacting with very diverse viewpoints on both sides, or very extreme, should I say, not diverse, but very extreme. And yeah, I find it fascinating that we can sound everything so much intelligent, and there are so many, wouldn't want to call them dialogues, but so many debates sort of happening, very intense, passionate, and looking at peeling onion layers of history, of who did what. And what I started to see was that there was a deeper pattern, you know, and it was very cyclical, and that these debates it's just a perpetuation. It just keeps fueling itself. And I was like, wow, there are hundreds of thousands of children dying, innocents being slaughtered in the most horrible ways. And yet we can be in suits and ties and have this bombastic, you know, endless debates that sound very smart. And yeah, for myself, I realized that I could not, I just didn't have the capacity to partake in that. It was very clear that that wasn't the solution. That was just a cycle. And at times it was a cry of the heart saying, why? I really don't understand why people have to go through that level of suffering. But also connecting it back to death, I want to pose this question to you. On one hand, I'm feeling that, yes, when one witnesses death in a holistic way, as we have been talking for the past hour or so, of the rituals and the honoring and being with the grief, that it will avoid these kind of unnecessary catastrophes. But at the same time, people who are in these wars, who carry out, let's say, these actions, they are in contact with death in another way. So that also brings the question, is that sometimes seems to do the opposite. It actually perpetuates that cycle more.
You know, when So I worked in prison. I said that. So I've worked with some of those people that have perpetuated death. And when COVID first happened, we couldn't go in the prison, and we went online. And one of the men that was formerly incarcerated that worked in the organization I was at brought in this person that did shoot him and murdered somebody. And I watched this video. It was part of the Redemption Project that Van Jones put out, and so their name are Christian and Gunnar, and you got to meet both of them, and then the first time they met after this shooting was in prison as a reconciliation, and you're like, oh my God! And at the end, they hugged. And after that, Christian was coming up to the board, and Gunnar actually supported him. And now they're the best of friends. It's kind of amazing, like the healing. And afterwards, I'm like, I want to know how that cold-blooded murderer healed. And so I started calling him, and we started having these conversations, and it was amazing to really hear that, he was born and his mother couldn't deal with him. He was kind of left in his room for hours and hours. And so he didn't have nurturance. And at a time, there was an older boy that started grooming him and starting molesting him. And he had this term called trauma reenactment, that if you are traumatized in some way, like, then they're strong and you're weak, and you never want to be weak again. And so you start recreating that, not as bad as what happened to you. And so he became very violent and had his ideas, and and he ended up being in prison. And he started really healing. He really started looking at himself and looking what happened from 0 to 5, 5 to 10. How, what are these really early traumas? What was the really early conditioning that he suffered? And at one point, I helped produce this workshop called Untangling Shame, that we met for 3 months every Saturday, and he led us through this process. And at one point, this woman that was with us told about her trauma, and it was so close to his, he just started crying. And he's like, we have really similar traumas, but you're giving, you're compassionate, like, you took it in a different direction. I took it in this direction. But he could heal. And so I go back to this emotional early time of how we're tended, like I've chosen not to be a parent in this life because I didn't think I had the capacity to really tend children, how they need to be tended, have a secure attachment, to know who they are, to have painful things, but have tools to deal with them. We're not really taught emotional tools. I mean, we're living in another generation where that's more available. But so much of this war comes out of poverty. Most people in prison, have early abuse, like really adverse childhood experiences. And so, yeah, how do we stop early childhood neglect? How do we really have children really being wanted and loved? How is it that people cross the line of violence and sexual misconduct with children? And if all that happens, if you're in poverty and you're in a war-torn situation, that's what is power, and you never want to be weak again, and so you recreate that. And so how do we shift that? How do we stop seeing, how do I look at my judgments? And I always love this, like, if you're pointing at one person, there's 3 fingers pointing back at you.
Yeah.
And if I'm thinking that, how do I really reflect on myself? Because only I could really do the work. Like, if my hatred, my anger is inside me, you're not making me do it. It's inside, and that's for me to really understand and tend where that happened for me, and happened for you. And so I do think this inner journey of really creating this inner sanctuary, really bringing up the sort of disowned parts of myself, our disowned selves, and welcome them, love them. Like, how do we really go into this place of self-love, self-nurturing on a deep level for our species, for our planet? You know, I love this planet is so beautiful, so amazing, and we don't treat it that way. And we don't, recently I've had to like look at our bodies. Like a lot of times we're sort of walking around with our heads and our minds, and we love this earth and we do a lot to try to tend it, but we don't do the same for our body, and our body is the earth. And so one of the greatest gifts you can do is really nurture yourself. Give yourself nurturing food. We all know what's not good for us. We all know what's not good for the earth. But we could do that somewhat for the earth, but can we really do it for ourselves? And how do we really change that? How are we not separate from this incredible place that we're living in? How are we not separate from the elements? We all are earth and water and fire and air and space. How do we nurture that? How do we know our whole health system is connected to how those elements are moving in the body, just like we're, they say the earth is 70% water, we're 70% water. We're not separate from. And so how do you nurture yourself as you're nurturing the earth and this planet and finding more kindness in the dash between being born and dying?
Yeah, yeah, wow. What I was wondering was how little do I actually know? And maybe one has to die quite a few times. At least that's what I feel, is that there are souls that are much more mature, you could say, and have become elevated. That's something that I've begun to recognize more. And you were talking about the Tibetan culture, and they really seem to have this amazing relationship with the process of death
And birth.
and birth. Yeah, reincarnation. They already recognize if what they call the tulkus, where they know that somebody is reincarnating or is an older soul, and what are their gifts and how best to support them. That's a different level of education.
I mean, it is, in my own studies of nutrition and health, there's 4,500 systems in our body. When I get sick now, I have issues as I'm aging with my esophagus or my ankles, and it's an opportunity for me to study. What do I know about my esophagus? I haven't thought about my esophagus, where your throat and esophagus come together, and your stomach, and what happens. You're like, what do I really know? What do I really know about this body? Like, this body is precious. It's magnificent, and we don't really realize that we could see and we could hear. Like, it's incredible that these bodies are here. And yeah, there's just this amazing woman that lived in the 12th, 13th century called Machik Latram, and she had her own lineage. She lived to be 99, and in this book of her life, she talks about knowing every bone in the body, and how it actually is that we come into form, and how there's a lot of five fingers, 5 feet, but there's also a head and limbs, and they all come off of different chakra systems. I'm reading it is oh my goodness, this was in the 12th century, and she had this ability to come into form or understand what's really happening, coming into form and out. And reading her teachings are just really incredible. And when my teacher Lama Sotram's husband died, she said, go out and meld with his mind stream. And so I did, and that was really incredible. And her son was in Tibet, and he wanted to do a 10-year retreat. And he kept going to Asam Rinpoche and saying, I really want to do this. And he'd say, well, how is David? Oh, he's working on the temple. He's doing all this. And then one day he came in and he said, oh, David passed. And he came to me, and I helped him through the bardos. And I was like, wait, there's no computers, there's no phones. The depth of practice, when you're born into deep practice and 14,000 years of wisdom, unbroken wisdom in the Bon tradition, 14,000 years of unbroken wisdom, and the depth of meditation and consciousness, that he knew that David died that far away. He's like, no, you need to go back home, and I was like, what are these practices that I'm doing?
So it was one of your teachers, and her husband had died, and she knew.
Well, so it was my teacher. Her husband died in Colorado, but her son was in Tibet. And the teacher was in Tibet, and he knew that David had died, and he had come to him, and his death helped him work through the bardos. And he told Lama Tsultrim's son that, no, you have to go back home, that he died. And so I think, like, at one point I taught this class called Remembering Our Way. How do we really honor the depth of spiritual knowing that's been taken away by progress and comfort? What is that depth of knowing the earth and how to bring food forth? How is, even in birth, like we used to know herbs that helped. It used to be mainly women that brought children in. There were no hospitals. There were no doctors. And in that, too, in those traditional cultures, you had to prepare for conception. If your baby was not well, it died, and you could have died. But there were foods that you ate, special foods that were eaten at different times of the year. Lots of people got married at that same time, so those foods would be available. Like, traditional cultures prepared for conception, so you had a healthy baby. And we've lost a lot to progress. And so for me to remember, not just death practices, but life practices, that I stay healthy, the loved ones stay healthy. I tend to the earth. I tend to the plants. I live more connected to the natural rhythm of things.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I've been a unique, different person all my whole life. Just that I've been a farmer for 37 years and lived a very alternative life and lived overseas. And now that I do debt work, I'm even a greater oddball. That's a lovable oddball.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating how we talked about a few things, but that in more recent past, or in different cultures, there is a lot more attunement with the sun and the moon and what's growing and its connection with the child that's to come. And one of the things I feel is there is tremendous power in the technology and facilities that we have, but it's a certain aspect, very, you could say, rational or right, left-brained, and perhaps you have to come and combine the two together. And maybe just as you were sharing, as I was reflecting to you about death and violence and all of this stuff, I think for me it brings a lot of humility that there's a bigger play at hand, and my job is necessarily not to solve it. Right?
Your job is to love.
Yeah, is to love. And also I feel like our natural calling and our natural gifts through spontaneity, and if you're really in tune with life, they shine. And maybe it is someone's job to be a frontline activist, and maybe it's someone's job to write a symphony and be totally disconnected from that. But I feel like as long as it's spontaneous and not some kind of a rejection or that kind of thing, where it's not a natural outcome, but some kind of forcing. One way or the other.
There's always the middle way. I do think, like, what is, there are so many blessings in our modern cultural context. And I think the thing is that in our advertising, we diminish and dismiss what was and still is wisdom from the past. And I think that's what we need to remember.
Yeah.
We really need to really honor that, the wisdom that of really earth-based cultures, and how they're not separate from us. It's what we did. We used to know the plant world because we had to. We knew what seasons and what plants were nutritive and what were healing and were used in one coming into form, but also at the end of life too, and like what are those healing ways. So I just think that there just is so much about us remembering and honoring the wisdom that we've set aside for progress.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because our idea of progress is actually rooted in a fear of death and in a fear of the elements,
Yeah, I think that's
right?
true.
Progress itself, if you want to use that word, or technology or science, can be a very beautiful creative process. What I've found challenging is, or what has been revealed to me, coming from an academic background as well, is that the engine behind that creativity is a rejection of nature, the cycles and rhythms of nature, as if they're other than us, and our job is a conquest
Yeah.
of coming them, overcoming them. And if you actually see our connection with that, and see death not as going back to the definition, I think oftentimes people equate that with an annihilation, which actually, from these experiences of near death or meditation or spiritual practice and remembering, as you say, is in fact the opposite. Death is life itself, and there is no annihilation of consciousness.
I think one of the big things that really get in our way is our attachment to comfort. Like you're talking about a rejection of the elements. Like we like to be in these walls and protected by the rain and the cold. And with that, we do many things. We cut trees. We, burn fossil fuels. We do a lot for comfort. And I think comfort is something that our ancestors didn't have for the most part. But when I look at the wild world, it's so amazing. They just live out in the world. We too used to live in rain and wind and sun, and we knew how to take care of ourselves and what to eat. Like I was just in a Point Reyes with the Thule elk. They're so amazing. We used to know. It's sort of like we used to know. We used to know how to live in the wild world, and our need for comfort. And I read this book once, and it really talked about all wars, and you could look at all wars initially through famine and through soil fertility, because if you had the earth that was really abundant and could feed people, and it feeds your brain and your mind, but if you start getting hungry, excuse me, the health of your brain changes, and you start seeing there's food over there and I want it. And so it's always about, war is about resources.
Yeah.
And so early on it was about food resources. And when we started being able to collect seed, we didn't just hunt or gather what was there, and we started collecting seed and, having farms. It became ours, not, it left the we and turned into the me. There's still cultures where all the food is harvested for everyone. And I think like our food system, I remember during the Iraq War, one of the first things that the Americans did was like, you wrote in some of the treaties that you couldn't collect your own seed. And I do think that seeds are our life, and we still play with the rights of seeds and plants, and hence we get denurtured in ourselves, and illness comes in. Illness is our mind and illness of our bodies, until we really see the generosity of this planet, and how do we build generosity for all people and stop moving through difference in power.
Yeah.
We're going to still have war. And
Well, yeah. I mean, these are such. I don't know if deep is the right word, but I feel like often. Again, going back to clarity, because there are so many diverse and different viewpoints, right? Yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but yeah, one question that I had for you was that we're talking about illness, right? Illness in the body, and of course that's often connected with the dying process itself, as you said a few times, one's final illness, right? In your experience, do you think that the process of illness is trying to communicate something, and if we resist that, it can complicate or prolong the illness, as if it's like it's trying to give you a message, and the message keeps getting louder?
yeah, I do think that's true. we don't like discomfort, and pain is discomfort, so we take things to try to stop the pain, and sometimes things need to run their course. You know, it's interesting, I don't get sick that often, but when I do, I'm grateful because I want my immune system to be strong. If I'm going to take something and stop it, then I'm not going to let my immune system to really have the warmth and the intelligence to heal myself. So, there is that. I think we like comfort, we don't like pain. And, what is that to go through an illness? And, you know, dementia, Parkinson's, those are all new, cancer are all new illnesses. And a lot actually comes back to our food. I have the blessing to have studied what traditional cultures really ate and how they took care of themselves, and what happened with the diet of commerce when we started trading sugar and like wheat. We actually took out the germ of the wheat because then it would go rancid and rats would come. And so we started trading with denatured food. And there's whole looks of like what traditional people, how they were healthy, and their children, like they had broad faces, broad chest, all 32 teeth. And what happened when they started intersecting with the diet of commerce? They started having cavities, they started having intense illnesses, and then the next generation really changed. And that's what I saw when I first started studying and looking at those pictures. I'm like, those pictures are me. Like, I had fangs, I had too many teeth for my mouth, I'm small. Like, there's ways my body really changed through the food system. Like, we all just used to live in place. We ate was this season. We ate what was connected with the land, and we've changed so much. And so our illness comes a lot from the food we eat, and how far it travels. And a lot, like even with cancer, there are beliefs that cancer is a fungus. And you look at the big silos of grain that are hot and wet. It's not the grain itself, but it's the fungus in that. And so, it goes back to living more in connection with place. What really grows now, what's here, I have to say, how do you eat with the seasons? In the winter, that we have this great ice cream place in Sebastopol. It is so hard to watch in the middle of the winter, people eating ice cream, this cold, wet, sweet food that is exactly what your body doesn't need. We need to be having moist and warm soups and nourishing. And so we've lost that context of what's really in season now, like watermelons, cucumbers, tomatoes are here in the summer because there's wet and moist. In the winter there's different things. And so we didn't have a choice back then. We just ate what was present and what was, and the culture and place we lived in. We were connected to land. And so illness, people do die. Like, for me, it's like, sometimes it's like, it's okay to die. It's okay to have an illness. Like, my partner has had a hard time with this, but, if I were to get cancer, I am not going to go through treatment. Like, that's polluting to the earth. I don't want to do it. And I understand why people do it. Like, I get it. I don't have a judgment, but it's not something I want to do. It's like, okay, if that final illness comes that is going to take my life, how do I honor my life? How do I really go there? And, is my life so important that I would harm this planet? I don't want to do that.
Yeah, it's in one way we're looking at older civilizations, and there is an evolutionary current. We are also here because of the ancestors.
That's right.
So whatever we have today, we can't hold them fully responsible. But I'm also a little reluctant to romanticize the past, because there have been wars and some. Well, unfortunately, we have weapons that now work on buttons. But I think it can be painful to be killed by a dagger or crushed by a stone.
And those infections.
Yes, those too. So it's also that there is an underlying evolutionary current, which is paradoxical, not to get into this, but in other podcasts and as a philosopher, I think about, there is no time, eternity, and then there is the evolutionary current of time. And if you look at any anthropology book, there are Neanderthals and
There was always something going
something
on.
else going on, and that's one of the things I connect with, is that I don't have sort of a prophetic vision of what is to come. But as we were speaking earlier, that there is an underlying sense of enthusiasm and curiosity and optimism that I feel like I want to surrender to. And any children often embody that curiosity and optimism because they have just arrived. And so I surrender to that with the faith that there is a vision, which I don't know what it is, but we're moving to that.
Moving. Life keeps bringing life force. Like, it's amazing. Like,
Yes.
life keeps happening. We're still, one of the things that I realized bringing up the ancestors, like I am the dream of my ancestors, and I realized I am living in unprecedented times as a woman in this body and culture, and that I have an opportunity, like my ancestors and many of us, like, not romanticizing all in the past. They did live closer to the earth and what was here. Like, I have an opportunity, because I'm not in survival, to really heal and look and break chains of abuse that happened. And, like, how do I use this life? How do I do the best I can to find understanding of myself, to find healing, to, like, really shift the ways that I have been unkind. And I did at one point take my bodhisattva vows to say I'll come back again and again to the end of suffering. It's a huge vow to take. And yet to be in service to that emotional tending and letting people's earth bodies and their heart essence to really bring the best that they can out in the world is amazing. And to do that and honor what they did bring in this life into their death. Like, it's an honor to be at bedside. It is an honor. Like, this work, I mean, I've been a farmer for a long time. It's a wonderful thing. And this work is so precious. Like, I work with some doctors, and like, they're like, it's so sacred to be in the presence of when death comes, and to honor a life, and to, that energy you were talking about earlier. Like, where does all this life force energy go? And to be in that field is an honor to feel, and to be like, what is that when energy is released into the vast wisdom of the universe.
Yeah.
And to go back into that clarity of, oh, this is what this journey was about, and this is what I learned.
I like how you use the word essence a few times, and one other word that is coming to me is like a homecoming, coming back home. And I think we also use this word life force. We have, of course, this character and human, and it's quite interesting when we are born, we don't have that, and when we die, we also don't have that, and just to sort of stay in touch with that home, right? That our home is perhaps the life force, not what's built.
Yeah, that's interesting, that, because I have struggled with belonging in my life, and it really is like, I belong to me. Like, this is my home. This is this sacred place. Like, how do I stop grasping? In the Tibetan world and their map, the elements, each of them are connected with a direction, a color, an encumbered emotion, and transformed into a wisdom state. And I really love that about Tibetan practice, that they really see that the motions are the gate to our awakening. And so with grasping of wanting love and connection and belonging and understanding, it's all on the outside. We're grasping on the outside. And it's like, oh, what if I bring that fire energy inside me and really build that, and build that place of my light and like really find a home inside myself. It's been incredible. Like, it's been really a transformation of wanting that to come from the outside into like it really radiating from me from the inside, and finding peace. Like like I told you earlier, that I've been really meditating on this concept of the earth essence of my being. In metta prayers, you say a lot of times, like, may you be filled with loving kindness, may you be well, may you be peaceful and ease. And I realized, I don't know peace. What is peaceful and ease inside of me? And so I'm like, wow, I'm going to meditate on that. And it was amazing to find peacefulness and ease in me. And it wasn't coming from the outside, it was coming from the inside. How do I find peacefulness and ease? And like, how do I cultivate that? How do we cultivate that? And really find, like, this is me. Like, this is, all the things that have happened, all the things that I've encountered, what's in my life right now. Like, how do I really live in a place of gratitude? And for the tiny things.
Yeah.
And really build that inside me, and find that rest place, that wisdom of fire inside me, and not looking at it on the outside of me.
Yeah, you mentioned gratitude earlier as well, and in life it seems that we take so many things for granted, including our own life, right? The life force.
It's an amazing thing, this body.
Yes, and so many gifts that have been given to us on this planet, and just the love of friends and family and everybody that we meet, and the food that we eat. We could just be overwhelmed with gratitude, right? Get to have this conversation with you, and we were sheltered and have nice couches to sit on, and all this technology to support it. Oftentimes this comes to me, is that when on my good days, is that these things are somewhat clear as to how much support is being given. And then if our vision becomes clouded, I think there is a Sufi saying that says, when God blinds man, it's in the heart.
Just going to, like, really looking at that gratitude. I was given a gratitude practice where every day I had to say, 10, 30 things I was grateful for, because then the other can't be there. And I remember my aunt, I got to see my aunt as she was in her dying process, and she was in the hospital, and she had fallen and broke a rib and then got pneumonia. So she was in incredible pain. And, I came to see her, and my cousin's wife was there. And I was just, these are little things that I get to do for people. I'm like, Aunt Sarah, like, just with every breath, I know it's painful, but think about all the wonderful moments you've had in your life. Like see the things that you were really grateful for. And she calmed, and my cousin's wife was just like, what did you just do? She's so different. And it's about just coming into presence, coming into gratitude, coming, like there are, and it is mind training. It's, there's so many wild things that happen, and it's going back to my hummingbird medicine, like, how do I choose joy and abundance right now? How do I see what is, like, that I have this precious body, that I could walk, that I could sing, I could dance, I could, see the hummingbird on my beautiful Mexican sunflowers, like, how do we take time to really be here in this present moment in life? That I, like, right now when I said that, I'm like, oh, I just felt my heartbeat. How often do I even are conscious of my heart beating? Like, wow, there's this river of life moving through me all the time that I have no agency involved in. It's just doing that for me.
Yeah.
And then one day it's going to stop.
Yeah.
And then, wow, where does, that's where the adventure, wow, where does all that energy go? And
yeah, it's quite fascinating that the very thing that is the most valuable thing to us. I often think of this thought experiment of what is the most important thing to you? And if somebody actually puts a gun to your head, what is the most... We naturally, hopefully, want to protect our life in that instance because we know the value of it. But otherwise, we just take everything for granted, our health, our life, and we're chasing something endlessly.
I want to go back to that process I told you about, the different color things, because as you go through this script and you're taking away all these different things that are dear to you, I was so shocked what were the last three things that were there. And then I was amazed what the last thing, what was the most precious thing that I wanted to be present at the time of my death. And I was so amazed, it was my partner was one of the things, hummingbirds were part of the things, but the last thing that I chose was my Prajnaparamita statue, that I could stay in that presence, in that knowing, in my practice, in like staying in awareness, like what happens when the elements dissolute and I take that last breath and I go to the tunnel, like how do I remember that vast wisdom that's always present and that's always been in me? Like it's never like, the essence of me was here before I came in this body. It's here now and it will be here when I'm gone. And how do I stay focused on that to my last breath and to whatever the beyond is? Like what would be that last thing that you would want to be able to focus on at the moment of your death?
Yeah.
It's fascinating what people have.
Yes. No, that's beautiful. And what that brings to me, I had a couple of questions as we sort of get close to the end. I don't know. I think in different spiritual traditions, maybe it's the Tibetan Buddhists, they say that what will be at the end is what is now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Although that's a beautiful coming back to simplicity, is that what is that we really want in when it becomes apparent that we're nearing our death. So maybe on that regard, I have two questions. One is, well, let's talk about sleep, because I find myself that I'm able to shed my burdens of what I have to do, the challenges in my life, so on and so forth, quite easily at night. I enjoy that sort of, feels like, oh, finally we're here. And it didn't used to be always like that.
Me too. Me too.
Both of us are connected with, for example, as spiritual practitioners. That's how also we met, through the Tibetan lineage. And what I find fascinating is that their transmission, as compared to other transmissions, there is a lot more creative richness in terms of connection with dreams and sleep and death, and that the similarity between these states. Dream yoga is a big thing in Tibet. So maybe just to posit that, I feel like sometimes we, at least for myself, not to project death at the sort of culmination of our life, but also every day it's happening.
That's right.
And if you really get into it, it's not even at night. We fall asleep. If you even look at the science, we do daydream. So dreaming is happening not just while we're asleep. You could daydream at any time, and you could perhaps day sleep as well. People do actually have micro sleeps. So yeah, we could reflect that there are many aspects, but just briefly that in fact is a dying process or opportunity if we welcome it.
Yeah,
we do forget everything.
I think every day is a whole life. Every meditation is a whole life where you're coming into awareness. You're brighter and you dull and you go back. I mean, that's a whole nother thing where we drink coffee and we have beer at night, to regulate like that energy cycle within us. And so I too have found, like, when I go to sleep, it's like, oh, like I finished that day. And it is this opportunity before you finish your day to like do a practice of gratitude and just have reflection, like, wow, what insights did I have today? And as you go into sleep, it's interesting that you bring sleep, because it is such a rich thing. And in my own trauma, like I have woken up, I haven't had insomnia most of my life. And I have woken up in trauma, ancestral trauma and other trauma in the middle of the night. So my sleep has been very disrupted. I have used it to do practice. I've used it to educate myself. I don't get upset. It's like just being in the quiet of the night is like I used to go out and meditate in the night. And so I think there's not only in dream yoga, but if you are up in the night, that essence of night and vast awareness and wisdom is so present in a different way. And as you know, the quietness of the day happens, and there is just in that bright, vast universe that we live in, like we're just a big rock moving through space. Like right now, as we're sitting here, we're just moving through space. Like we really are these small beings. And so I think that nighttime really allows your body to rest. I mean, they talk about how important sleep is, to like have that rest of your being, and how important it is for our mental health. And like it is a time to integrate what happened in the day before you go into the day again. And I love this, in waking, like how do we wake? Are you at effect of like, oh God, the alarm didn't go off and I have to run? Or do you wake up and go, wow, I'm grateful for this new day? Like what is this new day? Like what is your consciousness that you're bringing into the day until you go back into your death of the night and have time to rebirth again? In some ways I wake up and go, it's almost like Groundhog's Day. Like, whoa, I'm here on Earth again. Whoa, there's a lot of trauma going on here. Okay, how am I going to meet that? And there's a quietness at night,
Yeah.
and there's so much. Like sleep is so rich,
Yeah.
and I'm always envious of good sleepers
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
dreamers.
Yeah, I've had that insomnia as well. And as you were saying, my relationship with the day is a little interesting. In the early mornings, I find it to be very meditative and similar to having that night quality. And I was like, oh, amazing that I get to have this. And then as I start sort of my worldly affairs and livelihood, I have to say recently I haven't been, it's like I could do without it. It's like, again, I got to figure this thing called human life. But another thing that maybe we could touch on is how people die. That's one theme, and I have a few things on that. So sometimes people do, we were talking about looking forward to death earlier, right? That's oftentimes, lately I've even had prayers spontaneous on one occasion. It was like, just give me death, right? And often I actually see as to the kind of creative life that I would want to live, or what my heart aspires for, the path is through death. So I feel like that's just
Interesting.
give me the short circuit, and that might not necessarily be a physical death. It could be.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're dying all the time. Different, I've had a million deaths. I'm not the farmer. I'm not the young volleyball player. I'm not all those things. I've had many, many, many lives. And at one point when I was studying with Rinpoche, I'm like, oh, but my pain body keeps leading. Like, wait. And actually, this hummingbird that I have on me was one of the few spontaneous understandings. I was like really meditating. Like, if I had so many different lives, but I keep leading with my pain body. Like, how do I lead with something else? And all of a sudden, this hummingbird came shooting out of my heart. I'm like, oh, you have to lead with your joy. Like, your joy has to come first, and it has to be faster than your pain body. And so I think it's a real reminder of that. Death, like how we die. One thing I just want to bring in, because it's a new thing, and it's an interesting thing to be involved in California and now many other states, to have medical aid in dying, where you already have a diagnosis, and it just hastens, like, what is that to go through the process, and what is that to choose, like, I don't want to go through this long painful death. How is there right or wrong in that? And in the Tibetan view, like there is this dissolution that happens at the end of life, where the first thing that goes is the earth element, and you get heavy, you can't move as much, you can't walk, like the condense of your body like starts changing. And then and there's signs with that. You start seeing mirages. It goes into water, and like, how does the water element dissolute, where you can't hold anything anymore? Your urine, everything just there's nothing holding your waters anymore, and then it kind of signs of fireflies happen, and you go into fire. And when my dad was dying, this interesting thing happened where his circulation was really changing, and his feet were purple. There was, really cold in his feet. His stomach had a temperature, and his upper body was neutral. And this really amazing Bulgarian hospice nurse was there, and she's like, "Oh yeah, you want the fire element to leave evenly through the body, and you don't want sepsis to happen in the stomach." And so she's like, "Do you have any ice?" And so we wrapped ice packs and put them underneath my dad's armpits, and that's where the most temperature regulators are. And it actually regulated my dad's temperature throughout his body. And I asked all these people, and this one Filipino nurse was like, "Oh, that's what we do with fevers. Like, it's traditional knowledge. Like, this is how you bring fever down and regulate temperature in the body." And it is amazing, like, not long after somebody dies, that they're cold. Like, how does the fire element just leave the body? And then, the breath leaves. And, a lot of people are really afraid of the breath, and the death rattle. And, but what happens as you're going into dying is your lungs stop working as well. And there's this breathing called Shane Stokes that come on where your diaphragm starts doing the work. So it's just like you'll have these pauses like of nothing, and then it's like, and then your diaphragm will start pushing air, and then it relaxes and it stops, and so like that's a really like, whoa, are they okay? And by the time you get to the death rattle, there is no pain. It's just your lungs are filling with mucus and the water element is moving, but there's no pain involved. And at one point I saw my dad, like, his arm was out, and all of a sudden I saw this current kind of go in his arm and leave, and then it was like gone, like that system was closing down. So like how, like, our systems are closing down in the death process. And then in the Tibetan view, what happens after the last breath, you're not really dead. There's your consciousness, things are happening inside, and there is this white substance at the top of your head that's the masculine, kind of opposite of the sperm, that comes down the central channel to your heart. And then there's a red substance, the feminine, the blood, that comes up into your heart, and then your consciousness gets encased. And then this whole practice of POA is a transference of consciousness at the time of death. Lots of people just tap the top of your head or pull a hair, and it directs the consciousness out, and there's like a sound of pet that you help push the consciousness out, and you practice helping push your consciousness out. And then then there's the tunnel, and most of the time after you die, there's this dark vast space, and as I explained before, then the lights and the senses, and then you come into your guide. So the Tibetans have known that for a very, very long time. And so that's what's been interesting, to like have modern science and near-death experience bring people back, and for them to validate what the Tibetans have always known.
Yeah, that's interesting, because it seems like for a while in science, death has been a taboo also in culture. Is taboo meaning that we just put it under wraps, and that's not something we want to see, that's not something we want to study. And from what you're describing, is definitely in the Tibetan culture, it seems like that it's almost very scientific, actually very curious, to explore and curate, write down these elaborate stages, and also their parallels with dream and sleep. So it's quite fascinating, actually.
I want to say that, like, in terms of the taboo of death and not talking to it, I would feel really grateful that one of my end-of-life doula teachers is a doctor. And, to really understand, like, to be educated in the medical field, you do everything you can to save a life, and you fail if they die. Doctors feel bad when disease takes you. And she's just talks so much about learning from her patients, and they'll do so much to like bring somebody back to life, and then they'll say they have a do not resuscitate order, and then they're by themselves. So here you have 7-10 people trying to save somebody from death, and then they go into this hospital room and they're by themselves, dying alone. And like, how do we turn this around, that there's nothing wrong with death? It is this normal, sacred, amazing process, just as life. And when it is that time, how do we allow it? Allow somebody to live in beauty, in love, and yeah, she's taught me a lot, like what she learned from her clients and how different now she works with people that have disease, and how do they come to terms with their life, and come to terms with their death. And I think it's our culture really being able to just, it being, death is okay. Death is
Yeah.
not an emergency. Death is part of this journey that we're on. And yeah, we don't need it to come sooner than it needs to be, but when it is ready, how do we meet it with so much grace and gratitude for what our lives has been? Even the difficult things that you've had to work on. Like, how do you really take inventory? How do you really take that life review and say, what did I learn here? What insights did I get? What, this one man, I always like to ask, like, what do you think you learned here? What do you think you learned here? And he said, I learned how to love. He's like, my family never said I loved you. It wasn't their culture, and his wife also came from that, and he learned how to love, and that was a medical aid situation for me that I helped, and it was the most amazing things. I just got chills, so hi for being here with me. Him and his son were just eyes locked, loving through his last breath, and I realized, like, oh, what is it like to love somebody all the way through? I had somebody come and go, oh, I don't know if I could do this with my boyfriend. I've had to, like, I lost my mother and my best friend. I don't know if I could do that again. And I was like, well, what if you think about, like, you love him? What if you could love him all the way through? And she's like, that changed everything for me. Yeah, I could do this. I could love him all the way through. I want him to know that I see him and love him, and what a spiritual act to love somebody all the way through. What a blessing it is to love somebody all the way through and honor their wishes when they're ready to go.
Yeah, yeah, totally. One of the things that you had earlier brought up was assisted dying. I don't think we talked much about it, but so in India, I know that it might be also in other places that usually people at the certain point in their life, there was these 4 stages of life, and one was where you focus on spiritual aspects and go away for a while into the forest or somewhere, and the culture supported that, and then you fast till you leave the body.
That's right.
And of course, in more kind of spiritually evolved, if you want to use those terms, people who were more familiar with these states will actually announce that on so and so day I will leave the body. This will be like spiritual masters or mastresses, for that matter of fact, and just meditate and leave. And you were giving examples of the Tibetan practices of ejection of consciousness. And so people can have that kind of mastery of dismantling the system. But anyways, one of that fasting aspect was part of the culture. And I think recently I know that there have been some protests and government trying to co-opt that, some kind of an intervention, that was a form of suicide. And there were some debates. I don't know what the conclusion was on that. But I know that now in California as well, is that legal now if you wanted to have assistance in dying?
Well, so there's two ways. It is legal in every state in this country to choose to stop eating and drinking. It is our choice to stop eating and drinking. And I have a dear friend of my husband's family that chose to do that. She's like, I've had a full life. She had some cognitive events, and she's like, I don't want a slow death. And so she planned it all out with her doctor, setting up a hospice when she was ready. Her 2 kids came and stayed for this month and were with her. They would go canoeing. Like, she stopped eating and drinking. They were first going to canoes. They were listening to music. They would ask questions. And on the 7th day, and they wrote every day, like, what was happening. Is like fascinating. On the 7th day, maybe it wasn't, anyway, it was on one day, her consciousness, like her brain shifted. And then she was, after a few more days, went into this hospice facility, and she died a very peaceful death. Like, so she made that choice, and you know, it was a beautiful thing that they were all there, and she made that choice, and you know, there was support for her. So that is legal in every state in the country. It's called VSED, stopping eating and drinking, voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. And so that is a possibility for everybody. And so now, not in every state, but I think there's 11 states, more happening all the time. But in California, the law was passed in 2016 that you could have medical aid in dying. And so what happens with that is you have to have a 6-month diagnosis, you have to be 18 years of age, you have to have cognition, and you have to be able to either ingest or push something yourself. Nobody can make that happen. And so more and more people are making that choice. And so you have to verbally ask a physician to do this. Then you meet with a prescribing physician, just one-on-one. Nobody else can be there, so you're not being coerced in any way. And they see you have cognition, that you're making this clear choice. They look at your medical records, see, yes, like you are in this place of your death is coming within these 6 months. And then you meet with a supporting doctor that does the same thing, looks at your records, meets with you by yourself, sees you have cognition, sees that you are indeed dying, and then they give you the medication. And so the medication, and with that, the doctors, there's a lot in that they are not held liable for that. You know, this was a medical choice. And so they don't have to be there. You could have a doula there. You could have somebody you know and trust. But I would highly recommend having a doula, you know, that you could then be the child, the friend that gets to really be present. And then what you do, you choose this day. It's an interesting thing to choose a death day. And different people do it differently. But you do take an anti-nausea pill, like a half hour to an hour before, and then the medicine is mixed, usually with apple juice, and you drink that medicine, and you, within 5 minutes, you go to sleep. And you know, it depends. There are some red flags, like if you have had a lot of pain and you've been on opiates, it will take longer because you have some resistance. And also if you have any constriction in your colon, because that's where it's absorbed, can take longer. It could be a red flag. But the cases I've had, people have passed in 25 minutes. It can take 3 hours. It can take longer depending on where you are in your body. And you know, there's something about being able to die in dignity in your own terms. You are dying. It's not like you're taking your life. You're already in the death process. So, you know, people, physicians, everybody has to come to their own spiritual choice in that. But the cases I've had have been so profound and beautiful, and they've had, you know, but you have to come, we talked about, you have to come to deep acceptance. I'm ready. I'm complete. My life's complete, because you have to drink the drink, or we help somebody with a feeding tube. They have to push. They have to be the ones to push. You have to be the one that says, I know I'm coming to this end. I've had the life I've had. I'm making this choice. I'm already dying. I'm ready to let go and not necessarily go through the pain process.
And so I sort of have this aspiration to, you know, have it through a fast or something. And I was sharing that with a friend once, and he said to me, he quoted like Mike Tyson of all people, of when you plan for a fight, but when you get hit in the face, the plan goes out the window. So what he was saying was, it's good to have that, but we don't know if we'll have the mental capacity or what kind of illness we might have to make those choices. So I guess this choice is in the moment, at least this legal case that you're mentioning. It's not that I could decide 10 years before.
No,
Okay.
you have to have a 6-month diagnosis.
Okay.
And with stopping eating and drinking, like all of it, you have to be really clear. Like that's the interesting thing, is how do you become really clear, like, and have a spiritual determination.
So it seems like it's more of also how life naturally unfolds, and also partly gives you that opportunity.
Yeah.
But I think it's very important that we have a culture that this choice becomes available, especially when you're saying that you can stop eating and dying and that's legal.
Yeah.
I mean, that's even interesting that, it's who's inspecting that anyways, right? I, I'm, it would be interesting to live in a world where that was not legal. Could be I don't know if that there are places in this world where that happens.
I
You
mean,
will eat.
it is the natural process of you dying. You stop eating, like you
Yes.
stop being able to digest. I will say, like in stopping eating and drinking, like even if you have a tablespoon of water, it will keep you living for quite some time. It usually takes 2 to 2.5 weeks. This friend, it was 17 days. So usually it's 2 to 2.5 weeks that it takes a person to go, if they're completely off all water and completely off all food.
Yeah.
And so, there's things that you could do with glycerin and things like that to keep, moisture in and to tend. And, one of the big complications, because you need support, you have to have support with that. So it's harder just to do that. In hospice, once you cross a point where you're not, you are not thriving, there have been people that don't believe in it and have given people Gatorade in the night, and so that is your care team has to be really on board.
Did it kill them faster?
No, no,
I'm
no,
joking.
yeah, the
Gatorade.
Gator. No, it did not.
I thought it had fire hydrant in it.
Yeah, so who knows what's in that? But no, it took longer and it was really difficult. And so it's like, oh, you're bringing your overlay of something. So it's, it is that thing of writing down your choice, knowing your choice. And there are, with dementia and Alzheimer's, where you don't have cognition to have medical aid, there's an addendum that you could put on your advance directive that says, if I no longer recognize my loved ones, if I no longer, I want to stop eating and drinking.
Yeah.
Like, and it is a legal document to say, okay, this person has really stated their wishes.
Yeah, wonderful. And maybe for this conversation we bring this to a close. I totally felt being in this subject matter a very has its own intensity, and I felt that. And thank you so much, because it really, I'm very curious about this. So it's beautiful to see your perspective, since you're so in touch with this. And maybe on a closing note, I want to check with you if there is something that you feel you would like to share. But how does one, if someone's interested in the death doula work, how would one partake? Do you, by the way, also think that there is a need for more need for this?
Yeah, I think there's a really big need to educate people about doulas. It's kind of a newer concept that you would be really helped through the whole journey. We're used to now having hospice, which is so amazing, and hospice comes in once you have the 6-month diagnosis. But there's a lot happening before that, and there's a lot happening after that. So having an end-of-life doula, it's like the whole continuum, and anywhere from doing your pre-planning, way in advance in what you want, and really helping with that to when you get your final illness. So there are lots of courses now. It is becoming a thing. I have to look at those wonderful people that really brought home births into being. Like, they've come to age where they want home deaths. And so there is this resurgence. So there are a lot of end-of-life doula courses that you can find. There's many online. There's, with COVID, many went off online, but there's still some in person. There is Inspired Endings in Hawaii. They come here with Bobby Bryant and Dr. Charlotte Sharafand, and here in Sebastopol, Jerry Grace Lyons with Final Passages. She is one of the founding grandmothers of the home funeral movement. She's helped about 500 families here in the area, and she has a 3-level course, and I'm still involved with level 3 training of that. And so those are always ongoing. And, for anybody that's in Europe or wants an incredible vacation in the south of Spain in an incredible villa, me and a dear, dear friend named Cassia will be doing a training called the Mystery School of Living and Dying that will be a deep dive into really our own emotional landscape of our relationship to death and our spiritual connection. So a lot of somatic work and practices, and then we'll be teaching really practical things too, and we'll have a ritual of somebody volunteering to be our deceased and going through the whole process of them dying and doing home funeral body washing and afterwards. And we have a whole bunch of things. So that training is November 1st through 4th in Spain. And which is bringing me to this incredible pilgrimage that I'm now going on to Europe.
Yes. Yeah, we'll definitely put that in the show notes, the information, if someone was interested in signing up for. That's something that intrigues me very much.
I will say too, it's really interesting. There's a lot of people that went through doula trainings, and one of the pieces of like how the funeral homes, like we have an amazing funeral home here that really works with doulas, and we support each other. But many doulas have become funeral directors. So there's 2 in Los Angeles that there's people doing home funerals, really alternative things with the funeral home movement. And so that is changing. Another friend, they're on cemetery, like they are the board members of a cemetery and dig their own graves and do funerals. And now, like I said, in California, we're going to be getting, they call it natural organic reduction, where you could have your body composted, or down in the Bay, you can have aquamation, where there's a alkaline hydrolysis way of having your body go into disposition. And so there is a movement of change and creativity and sacredness, really, and more, how do I want this to be? How do I really author this for myself? So there are more doulas in the world helping, and we did create a doula alliance called the Sonoma County End of Life Doula Alliance, so people find us that way. And it's an amazing movement to really love and tend ourselves through this life and through our death.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, I really, my wish is that somehow, as you're indicating, this integration of these different institutions from, all these new alliances and the older hospice traditional system, it'd be wonderful if all of the powers got combined together.
It's happening. A friend just let me know about this land north of here where they want to really create a place where people could come and die and really be held in sacredness. So I think there's more and more alternatives, like how do we do this in a good way? How do we talk about it? I think that's the first step, is we have to talk about it, and not like, oh no, all this aversion to, like, I don't want to talk about death, I don't want to bring it on. And if we talk about it, then we could create alternatives that really feel at home. And I'll just say too, I really want to honor the grief process. It's we're talking about death and after death. It's the year of death, the year of grief is real, like to go through that. And I so wish we would go back to those old traditions where you would wear black, in India you wear white, that lets people know I am grieving. And one of the hard things to ask people is, how are you? You could ask people, how are you today? Like, where are you today? What's, because it is a journey, and it's not it's hard to think, most people think it's an emotional journey. It is, you go into liminal time, and like your whole nervous system is trying to figure out and reset, and, to really honor that place of grief, and not like, okay, you've been off work for 2 weeks, just like pregnancy, you've been off work, okay, time to go back. Like, how do we honor the body and the journey of recovering? Being a caregiver is a lot of energy. A lot of times caregivers could even die before their person, because it requires so much presence and
Wow.
so much emotional navigating, and family systems that you're working through. So really to be tender and kind with people that are grieving, and that everybody goes through it differently. There is no one way, and it's not something you get over. You will always walk with grief, and you will always walk with that person close into your heart, and they become your guide. People, you talk to them, they give you pieces of information, and so they will always walk with you. They will always be there, and how to really honor that
Yes.
piece of grief.
Yeah, that's a whole other deeper piece of staying connected with our elders. And very valuable, actually, to really know that we're not charting this terrain by ourselves, and that we have other souls watching over us and helping us out.
Yeah.
To be open to, hopefully this possibility also becomes very alive, because I think it's quite helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
It's such a
Michelle.
blessing to be with you.